pleased to introduce our visiting artist, Margaret Smithers Crum. Originally from Canada, Margaret earned her BFA degree in painting from Miami University in Ohio, and she's currently based in Houston, Texas, where she's a director of an art gallery. Her works are all created from and on plexiglass, a material that helps her explore concepts of strength and frailty. I'd like to thank Margaret for sharing her amazing work with us, and especially for traveling from Texas to be here for the reception. So please help me to welcome Margaret Smithers Crum.
Thank you so much. What I usually do when I meet a group of people who know nothing about me or my work is I try to give you three overarching sentences that will open some doors. First of all, I am Canadian, but what is probably a little unique about my background is I was raised on a 1-acre island in Ontario, Canada. My father was a scientist, and our cold weather home was on a lake. And as soon as the ice broke, my father went to our 1-acre island, which was about an hour and a half from Toronto. It's a glacial lake. My bedroom was immediately behind the boathouse. So just imagine that I am surrounded by water and light and constant changes that I would look at hourly. And I also observed all kinds of things in nature, from birds to fishes to countless changes in the seasons. As a young woman, after I was very young when I graduated from college. I was 19 as a senior. When I was 20, I followed a love interest to the island of Guam in the South Pacific. I lived there for 2 years. I taught in a school that overlooked the ocean. Guam is very tiny. It's 4 to 8 miles wide and 32 miles long. At least twice a week with machetes, we'd go down to the beaches. It's one of the best places in the world if you're interested in marine ecology, marine biology. And what happened was I began to have this lifelong love affair with our planet, the oceans, and the most valuable resource on Earth, water. So you can see I have very watery beginnings, and I take the notion of water through me, and it's in absolutely everything that I do. The other thing I want to tell you, well, three things actually. Many people ask me, why do I choose to work with plexiglass? And I work with recycled as well as bought plexiglass, and the trend is to work with more and more recycled material. I find that when most people look at the plexiglass, they think they're looking at glass. And for me, the notion that glass connotates fragility. It connotates that it can break. So if one is interested in the planet, if one is interested in life cycles and species, if you make those out of something that looks like glass, the obvious idea that can be derived from that is how easily can we break that everything has an Achilles heel. And so I found that to be a wonderful metaphor for existence, and it's one of the reasons I'm going to tell you about more that I am so drawn to this material. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that my family has a lot of science people in it. My father was a scientist. So I find that even though I'm not personally, say, looking at plankton, although I've done it, or molecules or outer space, it constantly filters into what I do. I believe that even though as artists we take our own ideas into our artwork, subconsciously we're a part of a much greater whole of human activity. And a lot of times I don't know that something I've watched, something I've read has filtered through into my work. So very oftentimes, an organic chemist might come along and they'll say, oh, that's a carbon molecule. I didn't know that when I made it, but it makes it more interesting to me because carbon molecules are, you know, in the very food chain of life, they're very, very important. So I want to tell you, if you see things, please say them to me, because actually it expands the dialogue, and I believe that art needs to reach out. You need to have that dialogue. I'm very enthusiastic that art should be a place that is inviting. I mean, you could critique as an artist, but I also believe that it's a way with music, with theater, with writing, to open so many doors and allow humans to talk to each other in a way that, say, possibly words fall short, although I'm a big advocate of words. The next thing I'm going to go into is painting, why I paint on plexiglass, and also to tell you how the whole thing happened. I've been working on plexiglass 19 years, and part of what I do to earn money, in addition to being an artist, is I established a company a long time ago, 30 years ago, that did conservation framing and some conservation. So it means I'm working with private collectors, corporate collectors. And when they switch out their collection, the plexiglass is scratched and they get new plexiglass, or, you know, many scenarios such as that. So when that plexiglass is taken out of those frames, I don't throw it out. And I had a pile of it, not knowing what I was going to do with it. And I love line three-dimensionally, line on painting, line on paper. And what I don't like about drawing and painting on paper is you have to cover it with glass or plexiglass to protect it. And I thought that that got in the way of the visual experience of that drawn and painted substance. So I began wondering, what could I draw and paint on that would let me not have to cover it with something that is protective? So I had the idea of sanding plexiglass. It looks sandblasted, but actually I use an orbital sander. So I got out an orbital sander and I sanded the plexiglass and on both sides, and I picked up Prismacolors. Prismacolors are simply colored pencils. They're very good colored pencils, and I thought, well, I wonder if I can draw on this. And when I made the first few lines, I literally stepped back because the charge of the color, it would be like drawing on a chalkboard or drawing on limestone. It so grabbed the pigment in the Prismacolor because of the sanding and the grit of the sandpaper, and yet it was so beautiful. I could do whispering lines, and it perfectly recorded it. That it was something I hadn't expected. So I thought, well, maybe I can paint on it too. And I started experimenting with acrylic, with oil. It took everything. And the real bonus was, because I sanded on both sides, and I'm going to show you, brought a sample. I began experimenting with painting and drawing on both sides of the work. So this teal color that you see here is drawn on this side, is painted on this side with acrylic paint, but the whites and the yellows or ochre colors are painted on the back side. And what happens is, it's like looking through transparencies. You get effects happening by virtue of the translucent material that you could never paint on a canvas or on a white paper, because you are looking through two surfaces. Same as looking through water. When you see reflections on top or colors on the bottom, or looking through translucent skin, you have a remarkable ability to create, to orchestrate many different kinds of, I'm going to say, sounds. So if I draw on the back, it's a whisper. If I draw heavily on the front, it's a completely different sound that I see that I'm making. So suddenly, my orchestration of mark making has doubled because of this material. Now, what else can this material do? This is an 1/8 of an inch thick plexi, recycled. I can also take the plexi and let's say all artists when they're working, one of the things that they do is that they don't like part of what they do, so they crop it out. So a lot of times on canvas or paper, you'll say, oh, I like this, but I don't like that. They cut it out, they put it aside. So I started cropping my paintings. And what I found was when I was starting a new painting, like a collage artist, I could pick up something that I had rejected and say, but what? If I were to join it, what would it look like? So I talked to a plexiglass fabricator, and he said, oh, you can join those beautifully if you use the proper plexiglass chemical, which puts the molecules into solution. You just need to weight them and clamp them, and your product will be as strong as the plexiglass itself. So then I began to see that I could grow with modular pieces. The next thing I began to experiment with was what happens if I use a product that's a little bit different from plexiglass, and that is what I heard someone saying in here, Lexan. Lexan is a polycarbonate. What is a polycarbonate? It's just plexiglass with more water in the molecular structure, and that causes it to bend. I can bend it with my hands, but more typically I'm using a 1,000-degree heat gun, and that enables me, like on the forms you see on this wall over here, to do some pretty wild things. I have an installation right now in Houston, Texas, where I created 15 tumbleweed-like structures that are made of woven material like this. I hang them with a tackle device that causes them to spin slowly with air currents, and then when they hit the floor, they begin to move across the floor as if the wind blew them. And my feeling is it's bad enough to be a tumbleweed where you're at the mercy of the winds to be buffeted and drop your seeds to germinate. But if you're a glass tumbleweed, your precarious existence is even more challenged. And that's the whole idea. So it gets me back to this piece over here, and I'll pass these around. This is made exclusively with the polycarbonate. A lot of people ask me, well, how is it on the wall? The reason, when I fabricate these, I have found a way to fabricate a little plexiglass cube on the back of the form, and then I use that same chemical so that it's fabricated into it, and these forms become a giant push pin that I can move around on the wall. So when I put this on the wall, if I were to go to an area right here, I'm not going to pull it out, but there's a little nail there that's attached to the work itself. This work is cut with, each piece is cut with a bandsaw. I'm assuming most people know what a bandsaw is, but how do you cut these? You can use a bandsaw, you can use a handheld router. Each one is cut individually, sanded, painted, shaped, and then joined together. So this might have 200 pieces in it, but when I finally go to install it, it is actually broken into 6 sections. I have a top left and right, a center left and right, and a lower left and right. And when I'm working on a piece like this and I'm fine-tuning the composition, in my studio, an entire wall is a 3/4 inch foam wall that has sheetrock behind it, and then I take Tyvek paper. I cover the entire wall with Tyvek paper, and as I'm making these, I don't know exactly how they're going to fit together. The foam wall, once I have the nails fabricated into it, I can move them around like giant push pins until I get the final arrangement I'm happy with. When I do that, I draw around the entire composition, and then I mark where those nails are. And what that happens at that point is that paper becomes my map. I roll it up, I take it to your beautiful gallery here. I put the paper map up on the wall, and I know where all the holes are. They're numbered, like 1 through 20, and put pilot holes in all those holes, and there's a number on them, and I go and retrieve the forms that have the same number. The whole thing goes up in about 30 minutes. So there's a lot of planning, but as you can see, the result, the shadows that are cast by something like this are as much a part of the painting as the forms themselves. The paintings are painted on both sides, as I said, and if you want to look at my fingers, it's quite translucent. So you can see all through it the transparent, like here, you can't see my hand. That's because it's very thick on the back and very thick on the front. And I really like the veils of color compared to the thicker paint. Another tool that is very unconventional that I use, that some artists use, but I use it a lot, is an orbital sander. So when I have painting on here and I don't like what I have, I get out my orbital sander and I start sanding away the paint. And two things happen. One, I get rid of something I don't really want, but like looking at an ink blot, you know, as I begin to sand away, I get these beautiful, delicate veils of color because I'm sanding away. And it's something that I couldn't do with a brush. So a lot of these surfaces are surfaces that are delicate because they've been sanded. And you get this beautiful transition that is kind of like, if you think of the sky and the way the light changes, it's very hard to have that graduation of color, but if you're using a sander, it's very easy to attain. So I oftentimes will have these veiled, sort of soft looks, and then this very thick paint on top, because I like the textural contrast. I'm going to next go to this piece here. It took me a year to complete this. Each one of these forms, and I'm going to lift one up, is a dodecahedron, which is a 12-sided polygon. They're very difficult to make. I have to cut 12 pentagons. I have to then, I cut them on a bandsaw, and they have to be absolutely perfect. Then I go to a drum sander that has what is like a protractor that you can change the angle of the sanding, and I have to make a 32-degree bevel on the edge of each one of those pentagons, and then I use the chemical, and I look like I have 6 little butterflies, and then I attach them all together to make a single dodecahedron. And the reason that I picked the dodecahedron is because dodecahedrons are all through nature. They're all through the universe. They're now beginning to have at least a discussion that the universe itself is more dodecahedron-like than circular. And so I just was really attracted to the form. It's very strong. I can drop these. They won't break. But what really attracted me to this is I wanted something that looked galactic, as well as something that could be microscopic, as well as something that could look like water. The other thing that I did with these, and it took a while to get the idea going, is like this form right here has a lot of bubbles on it. It's because I decided to make dodecahedrons that were dying or imploding, and others that were rising out of the sand. So I took a partially constructed dodecahedron, and I took a 1,000-degree heat gun, and I superheated it. And that's how I get these bubbling effects, and then it begins collapsing on itself. Naturally, I was thinking of stars imploding, but really it's any life form, because I'm tremendously interested in life cycles of all creatures, whether they're galaxies or whether there's something that's microscopic. A great Boon was something like this, is the reflections on the central plexiglass sheet, which is also recycled. The painting on this sheet is exclusively on the back side, and the way that I got that marbleized look is I experimented with different viscosities of paint. So what I would do is I would take the plexiglass circle, turn it over, cover it entirely with water, and then I took black gesso and brushed over it and literally took different kinds of paint and viscosities and took several toothbrushes and flung it over it. And what happens is they start dispersing the different colors, and you end up with that marbleized look. It looks very much like water. So that is how that was done. I've been in places where instead of having a wood floor, it has a black concrete floor, and I've had many people ask me, did I paint the floor for the piece, and it always makes me kind of laugh when that question is asked. The black sand is meant to look kind of volcanic, like obsidian. I've gotten that from an aquarium store. I picked the black sand because I wanted something to look primordial, kind of like something you would see during an earthquake or a volcano erupting. Very drawn to black volcanic sands. The other side of that, since I said that water is important to me, volcanoes are very important on our planet Earth because the water that we have are caused from the geologic time when we were so volcanic. And so that dialogue between Earth's history and the fact that we're a water planet is very important. And the fact that I'm very concerned about our oceans and about water on the planet, it attracted me to do something where it could be interpreted from many, many different levels. This piece over here, again, it's getting into life cycles. I like the idea that these could be seeds, they could be eggs, but I thought the idea that a painting that would drop something out of the painting was the unexpected, and it kind of began getting me going in the direction of this. So this is an earlier stage from this piece over here. This piece exclusively is made with the polycarbonate. Each one of these forms on the wall, and I'll lift one off, is fabricated with the nail attached. So it's like, again, it's kind of like a fancy push pin. It takes a long time to do all of these. I was thinking of creatures in the ocean, on the current, that had either been born, or if you were thinking on things in the wind, were germinated and now are airborne or waterborne. And it's this idea that when something begins on its life cycle, it's dependent on many forces that it is beyond its control: the wind, the current, disease, predators. A lot of these forms, it's not obvious, but you can see we have these individual forms, and then we have the larger encircling forms. Most of these encircular forms have one of these creatures inside of it. And it's very subtle, but I was thinking predator and prey. I was also thinking in the sea there are creatures that are called mouth breeders. They carry their offspring in their mouths. So I kind of like the idea that it could be interpreted both ways. But there is a definite little predator-prey relationship in this particular piece. What else about this? I did use the 1,000-degree heat gun and was able to shape them with that. Let me finish up with the paintings over here. Oh, I'll finish up with this piece over here that glows. These two paintings are very much like the paintings on the opposite side of the gallery. They're meant to be like a stream. What really attracts me to streams and rivers is that it's always changing, it's never the same. So I had the idea of making a long stream around the gallery. So originally I had more of these long paintings, and it was similar to, if you could imagine, something in the morning. By the end of the day, the stream changes. You have reflections. We have things under it. They're quite transparent. More of the sanding and thick paint. I think this one you can really see my hand through it. This artwork over here, I was thinking again in terms of kind of seasonal changes. This, you could think of this as the moon, the tide, fish, leaves, many, many, many different things. Some of them, all of them, went through my head. This is silver leaf, so I entirely leafed it and then I sanded it off. I left some echo forms in here that kind of look like these forms, as if they passed over it and left an impression, kind of getting the idea of cycles and life and time. This artwork here is called Time Released. I was thinking a lot about global warming and the glaciers, but more importantly, I was thinking about the gradual buildup of something very beautiful in nature and the eventual decline of it. Because one of the things I think as all human beings that we do is we have to make peace with, we're young, we have a certain vitality and beauty, and then we age, and you have to make peace with aging, with disease, and not only with ourselves, but with people we love, with animals that we own, and with the earth itself. So the breakdown of something that was built up, that I was trying to attain a kind of beauty, I think is very poetic. It's meant to be a metaphor for existence. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking about glaciers, I was thinking about global warming, and I was thinking about the planet. So how was this made? I had many, many, many sheets, small pieces of plexiglass that were recycled. I cut each one of them on the bandsaw to look very icicle-like. And then I laminated them all together. So there's probably, I'm going to say, somewhere between 50 to 100 sheets all laminated together to create this. All of the shards that you see down here were hand snipped on long pieces of plexiglass, so you can't buy those. And then a lot of people say to me, oh, did you pile them up like that? No, I actually glued a peak so that I could then drizzle the others and then strew them about on the floor. So that is how that one is done. And I'm going to let you ask questions. I'm sure I've forgotten something I should say. But the final piece I'm going to show you, this is called Passage. It's a piece I'm very personally attracted to. What I wanted in a gallery setting is I like to have it fairly dark and then to have a light shining down on top of it, because when you see it, it really kind of glows. And my initial inspiration for creating this was there are a lot of very beautiful sea creatures in the ocean. They're a part of the ray family, and there's one called a carpet ray, and it has this incredible long trail behind it, and as it moves through the ocean, it undulates. I mean, it's just breathtakingly beautiful. So I had the idea of creating something that would feel like the way a bird moves, but through the water. And I wanted to do something with the plexiglass that would look membranous and delicate and beautiful and glass-like. So I cut out of a large piece of plexiglass that was recycled with I drew a kind of a big oval shape, and then I made all these scallops around it, and I cut it with a handheld router. And I put foam on my tabletop, laid the plexiglass over, and then moved the router all around my drawn form to cut it out. And of course, the plunge from the router goes into the foam. I extracted my oval, and then I took the same router and I made the bit not go all the way through, and I could use it the way a Dremel tool etches. I could make passages all through the plexiglass that only partially went through. And what happens is the light obviously shines through that, and you get these beautiful linear shadows on the floor. And the final thing I did was I took a Dremel tool and I made finer lines all through it etching it at different levels. The little bit of yellow on here, I experimented with using an airbrush and aniline dyes just to create the slightest veil of kind of a golden color. And I wanted it to glow, so I wondered what I could do to create this white interior, knowing that it was something that I envisioned that was in the sea. And it isn't anything in particular, it's just really this graceful, very fragile thing. I decided to take white salt and drizzle it, and some of the salt fills the passageways. And the final thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to catch the viewer by surprise, so that when they saw it initially from the side and then saw it directly looking into it, I have many of those plexiglass tiny shards that act like crystals, so they're glittering, so you're not really sure what those are doing. But I wanted something to look like this was carrying its offspring or was birthing something. Even that is indistinct still in my mind, but you have these globe forms on the inside that clearly this form is carrying along. Thus it's called passage. The forms themselves in here, I wanted something that literally looked very, very fragile and glass-like. And I had very old glass paperweights that were globular in form. So I took, quite honestly, I took vodka bottles and cut out the part that I thought I could form. I cut them out into circular shapes, and then I took my 1,000-degree heat gun and I melted them over the glass forms, and then I extracted the glass paperweights, and it gave me these really delicate, pod-like forms that, they're really very, very, very magical. And what it is, why it is, I don't really have those answers for you, except that I was trying to create a magical creation that would make your imaginations go in many, many different directions. And the fact that it's glass, I was only trying to underscore the whole fragility of existence on Earth. So that's pretty much it. If anyone has any questions?
That was an oval to begin with, and then you shaped it. How did you do that?
That's a great question. I took a big 6-foot-long packing cylinder, like what you would use to sand carpets or large pieces of paper, and I ran a board through it and straddled it over 2 tables. And then one of our workers for our company, I have 2,000-degree heat guns, and I set her on one side and I was on the other, and we're both superheating the form. And then we decided it didn't work for her to be on one side and on the other because we weren't getting enough concentrated heat. So we worked on one side and then had gloves on and literally were massaging it over the cylinder. And then we got on the other side and we did the same thing on that. And the final thing that I did was these parts that dip in and dip out, I then went in with a 1,000-degree heat gun and tried to manipulate the edges. And it was sanded, this form was sanded, but wherever I hit it very strongly with a 1,000-degree heat gun, it did a thing that I didn't expect. It got rid of the sanding and superheated to complete glass-like clarity again. So you have this sanded and then clear and then sanded then clear. And to me, it's the most glass-like of anything I have here, other than possibly the glass dodecahedrons. Some people ask me about what media I can use when I paint, because they think, oh, can you use acrylic, can you use oil? The truth is I can use almost anything. So if you were an oil painter, you could paint on plexiglass. If you use acrylic paint, I use oil pastels and oil bars just all the time. Tools is another question I am asked about. What do you use to cut with? Anyone else have any questions? Nope. And I've done a good job.
Will you join me